So we're going to be looking at table 220.55, demand factors for household cooking appliances over 1 3/4 kilowatts. This is a great place to start, especially for the Florida electrical contractors exam. I would say that this is the table that you're going to use more than any others on the exam. So keep that in mind. And the first thing we need to look at, and by the way, this on in the 2020 code, it's on page 78, 70-78, 220.55. If for some reason you're hearing this video and it's not on that page or it's not this exact table, I doubt seriously these numbers have changed. The 2017 is the same, and I imagine when it gets to the 2023 that this will change. But either way, for the 2020 code, it's table 220.55, demand factors for household cooking appliances over 1 3/4 kilowatts. All right. So it's got the four columns. So let's look at the four columns. You've got the number of appliances. Okay, that's the number of appliances we're talking about. Column A is when you're dealing with an appliance that is less than 3.5 kilowatts. All right. And that is over 1 3/4 and less than 3.5 kilowatts. And it's expressed as a percent. And this is important because not all of these columns are expressed as a percent, which can make it very confusing if you don't have somebody walk you through this thing. Okay. So then we go column B, and that's between 3.5 and 8 3/4 kilowatts. And it's also expressed as a percent. All right. So column number 1 is the number of appliances you're dealing with. Column number 2 is somewhere over 1 3/4 and less than 3.5 kilowatts. Column B is 3.5 to 8 3/4, and now column C is anything over 8 3/4, and it's expressed in kilowatts, and that's what can be confusing. We're no longer talking about percent; we're talking about kilowatts. And in the table itself, it actually says not over 12 kilowatts. I don't like it that it says that because it actually is for over 12 kilowatts. You just got to do a little bit of math. You are going to use that column for over 12 kilowatts. If they ask me, I would say that would be something that could change because that can be confusing. All right. And then they have all these notes. Oh my gosh, trying to get through these notes. They can really be intimidating. Okay, so we might as well just take them one at a time. So note number 1. So if you're dealing with over 12 kilowatts, now it says up to 27 kilowatts, which is fine. Now you're not going to have over 27, so don't worry about that. But if it's over 12 kilowatts, all right, we're going to add 5% to the kilowatt rating in column C for each kilowatt over 12. Wow. Now that sounds complicated, but it's really not. All right, I'm gonna walk you right through that. So let's say you have a 14 kilowatt appliance, right? Well, and then let's just say we're dealing with one. So it's one appliance. It's one appliance, left-hand column, one appliance. We go over to column C, and we pull out 8. Okay, 8 is a number off the table. All right. So we start with 8. Now, since it is a 14 kilowatt appliance, it's 2 kilowatts over 12. So we're going to increase that 8 by 10%. 2 times 5%, 10%. So we take 8 plus 10%, and it would be 8.8. All right, and we're going to do some more of that. So if you didn't quite follow that, that's fine. Okay, so note 2. Okay, now this is for over 8 3/4 through 27. So that means we're going to be using column C of unequal ratings. We're not even going to talk about that right now because it takes this column C, kilowatts over 12, and makes it even more complicated than it already is. And I don't think you're going to need to know that. All right, so I'm not really going to be discussing that at this point. I might do another presentation later where we talk about that, but I don't think you're going to need it for the Florida electrical exam. So we'll put that on hold for a minute. Let's not worry about that. Note 1 is very important. You've got to be able to do this. Note 2, we're not going to worry about that right now. Note 3 is important. Okay, so these are, we're working with our, our appliances that are between 1 3/4 and 8 3/4. We're going to add the nameplates together and then multiply the percentage in the appropriate column. For instance, if it was a 3 kilowatt and we had uh, uh, 3 of them, it would be 3 times 3, which is 9 kilowatts. And then we would go to the column where it says 3 appliances, and it would be 70%. So it would be 70% of that 9 kilowatts. Okay, whatever that ends up being. Okay, and we're going to do more of these, so just kind of hang in there with that. And then you could have some appliances in column A and some appliances in column B, and you got to do them separately. You got to do the column A appliances together, then you have to do the column B appliances, okay, and then add them together if it's all on the same feeder or service. Okay, all right. Um, and then, and we'll talk about that some more. We're gonna do some calculations here. So just kind of hang in there. If it's starting to get a little too complicated, just kind of hang in there. It's not that big of a deal. All right. Note 4 is about branch calculations, branch circuits. So we're not even talking about feeder and service here. We're talking about branch calculations, and I don't think you're going to need that one either. So I'm not going to deal with that in this presentation. We might do that, like I said, in a future presentation where it gets a little more complicated. But for the basics and for the exam that you're going to be taking, I think you're only going to really need to know note 1 and note 3. We're not going to worry about our branch. And then note 5 is interesting because it's not very complicated. It's pretty simple. It just applies to instructional programs as well. All right, so if they say, which can be a little confusing if you didn't realize this, because you might be tempted, if they were talking about it was in some type of a home ec class or something like that, you might say, well, that sounds commercial to me. Well, it's not commercial. You don't go to you don't go to what they call the other than dwelling. We're just going to a home ec class or an instructional institution is figured exactly the same as a dwelling. All right, so that's interesting. So we're going to move along just a little bit here. Hopefully you've seen these before and this is a review, but if not, that's fine too. Okay, so for all the questions in this section we're going to talk about, here's what we're going to be considering. We're going to say we're working on a 4-unit residential apartment building. Got 4 units. We are calculating the demand for the service and the feeders. Okay, so this is what we're doing. So the whole reason that we are doing this adjustment is because this is residential and we know that we're not going to be using all of our cooking equipment all the time, right? And usually when we use it, we're not going to use all of it. We're just going to use one or the other, and not everybody in the whole building is going to be using it at the same time. So we get to reduce the size of the feeders and the service based on that, right? Okay, probably already knew that, but just thought I'd throw that out there for anybody who's really green and taking this. Okay, so we're going to say that the units each will receive a 10 kilowatt range. What will be the demand for the service and the feeders? Okay, so knowing that we're going to be using column 1, we're at the number of appliances. We should know the number of appliances now, okay? And then look for the correct number in item C, in column C, and hit the pause button and see if you can figure it out. Then come on back. And did you get 17? It should be 17 kilowatts. Okay, so simply we're going to start with 4 appliances. Remember, we got 4. It's 4 units. All right. And it is over 8 3/4, so we got to use column C. Now it's not over 12, so we don't have to worry about the 5% thing because it's not over 12, right? So we have 4 appliances. We followed over to column C. When calculating the conductor size needed, it's 17 kilowatt. That's the kilowatts that we're going to have to consider for the four ranges when we are sizing the service and the feeders. That's pretty simple. Okay. Of course, you can imagine we're going to move on to one that gets a little more complicated. All right. We didn't have to do any adjustment. We just had to read that right off the table. Okay. So now we're going to have to do an adjustment. All right. Now the units will receive, let's say in this scenario, the units are going to receive a 15 kilowatt range. What will be the demand for the service and the feeders? Remember that note 1. For every kilowatt over 12, we have to add 5% to the value in column C. All right, so hit that pause button, do a little calculation, see if you can come back and get it right. Okay, did you get 19.55 kilowatts? So here's how we did that. Since we were at 15, we had to get the difference between we had to figure out how many kilowatts it was above 12. So it's 15 minus 12 is 3. Now it's 5% for each kilowatt over 12. 3 times 5 is 15. So column C will be increased by 15%. So we go to column C, once again, 4 ranges, okay, 4 appliances. We follow over to column C, we get 17, we add 15%, we get 19.55 kilowatts. Now I've got this how about that calculator. Now this is the reason I'm asking this. When I use my calculator, I just hit 17, clear it out first of all. Try to get in the habit of clearing it all out when you get started. Clear it out. 17 plus, hit the plus sign, 15 and hit the percent. And then that'll give you your answer if you've got the right kind of calculator. Some calculators, you have to go 17 plus 15, hit the percent key, and then hit the equal sign. If that's the type of calculator you have, you need to realize that. And you really should be doing these calculations with the calculator you're taking into the exam. You know, you can't take your cell phone in, and I know that 80% of you are probably doing this on your cell phone right now, but you really, I would encourage you to use your calculator that you're going to be using in the exam, and use the simplest, just buy the simplest calculator you can buy. You can just go into the dollar store. That's what I did for a $3 calculator. It had everything you need. And just make sure there's a percent sign on that calculator and a square root key. Those are the 2 things you need for these exams. So anyway, 17 plus 15, hit the percent key, hopefully 19.55 kilowatts or 19.55 pops up. If it doesn't, like I said, hit the equal sign and see if it pops up. If you have a Casio calculator, this ain't gonna work. And I would not even use a Casio calculator for this particular exam. Casio calculators work on margins, and it is a whole it's a whole new presentation to talk about margins and why when you hit a percent key on a Casio calculator, you get a totally a number that you're not going to be able to use on this exam. So if you had a Casio, I want you to consider buying a different type of calculator. Otherwise, you got to figure out what 15% of 17 is, and then you got to add it to 17, and then that just makes it, there's just more room for error there. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too complicated for you guys. All right, so let's go on. So we took care of column C. Let's talk about column A and column B. Okay, so in this scenario, we're going to use column A and column B, and we're going to say instead of those 15 kilowatt ranges, we decided that these units were going to get a 2 kilowatt cooktop and a 5 kilowatt oven. What will be the demand for the service and the feeders? And I want you to look at note 3, okay? So if you look at note 3, it'll tell you that you've got to figure out the appliances that are um, up between 1 3/4 and 3 1/2, the ones that are for column A. You got to do those separate. You got to do the column B one separate. And then when you get those 2 figures, you've got to add them together. Remember, it's 4 units. All right, and each unit has a 2 kilowatt cooktop and a 5 kilowatt oven. and I want to know what will be the demand for the service in the feeders. So with that in mind, all right, hit the pause button and come back and do calculation. Come back and see how you did. Okay, did you get 15.28? Let's take a look. So we did our cooktops, all right, because those were out of column A at 2 kilowatts. All right, so 2 kilowatts times 4. Now remember, this was a 4-unit residential apartment building. It was 8 kilowatts altogether for those appliances. 8 times 66%, we looked in column A, it was 66%, we got 5.28. Okay, great. Then we did our ovens. They were 5 kilowatt, and there was 4 of them again, so it was 20. We look at column B. What's our percentage? 50. So we take our 20 times 50%, which is 10. So we add the cooktops and the ovens together. 5.28 plus 10, 15.28 is your total for those. Okay, and if you can do this much calculation on this table, 220.55, you're going to really have it nailed. Now, like I said, I'll have another presentation later, which will get a little more complicated, where you've got different values of your column C, your over 12 kilowatt. That can be a little more complicated, but I don't really think you're going to get that question. And then we'll also talk about the branch circuits as well, which gets a little more complicated. But this is your basics, and this is really what you need. Make sure you got this down. All right, this has been Jack Sheffield, Jack the Exam Guy. I appreciate your